Hello and welcome to a live stream of Cloud with Chris. You are with me, Chris Reddington, and here we talk about all things cloud. And it has been a while since we've had what I'd call a normal episode in terms of content. We've done Tool Up Tuesdays, we've done the monthly tech roundups, and we're back with some of the usual service being resumed, bringing guests back onto the show and talking about some interesting tech and some interesting stuff. So tune in, settle down, and just relax and enjoy for the evening. We've got a great session coming up talking all about feature flags, so stay tuned. But before then, just want to give a quick couple of updates, actually. So if I just bring the screen up here, and you'll see that actually there was some great stuff happening today. There was the UK Tech Community Day. It was a lot of fun. I was invited to go along and speak, which was something different in the day today, but it was a lot of fun. Lots of love for the wider community, lots of talking about sharing practices among meetup groups and all of these types of things. So if you're in the meetup community, I definitely encourage you to check that out. It was a lot of fun. Got to talk a little bit about Cloud with Chris, and you might notice something interesting in that screenshot, so we'll come to that in a second. But got to hang out with some great community advocates as well, like John Lunn, Johnny Chips, and Matt Fatunka, Memleak, of course, who you know from Tool Up Tuesdays if you've been watching that. But some really exciting news that you may have seen on Twitter. I posted it on LinkedIn just earlier today as well. We're going to be launching a show on Microsoft Learn TV. So, this is part of the day job now, I guess. We're going to be launching a show called Lunch Bites. And the idea with Lunch Bites is it's a lunch and learn style type of show. We get different cloud solution architects from the UK coming on and talking all about a certain area, certain topic. So next Wednesday, 12 noon UK time, we're going to have Matt Fortunka joining us talking all about DevOps and API management. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So definitely come along to that if you're interested. It will be available on demand as well, of course. The other piece is a big thank you to Steph and to Adam for hosting that great event today as well. Brilliant job. I think it's been a great success and looking forward to more community events like that. And final update before we get on to the main event for the evening here. Again, you may have spotted it in the one of the screenshots earlier, is Cloud with Chris has had quite a substantial UI overhaul. You may know that I've open sourced my Cloud with Chris theme. It's something that I'm working on because I want to give back to the content creator community, make it really easy to kind of host your own version of a site. And I've really spent some time trying to make the design a lot more consistent, make things a lot more interesting. So hopefully you think the same and you agree. Would love feedback as always. Go ahead, take a look. I know a lot of the banners look the same right now. That's next on my list to go and update because I've got all the images. Just need to update them. So take a look at that. Let me know your thoughts over on Twitter at RedoBowen. But there we go. At this point, that's all of the kind of big updates we wanted to get done out of the way. We're on to the main event for the evening. So it brings me great pleasure to introduce our guest for the evening, Mr. Chris Ayers. Hello, Chris.
Hi, Chris. How's it going?
I'm very well, thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. I know my surroundings might look a little Spartan at the moment. I'm actually in the process of moving offices in my house. I just remodeled one of my rooms. And so this is going to be that last actual recording in this room. I'm moving everything over this weekend.
Excellent. I'm glad, we can have the momentous occasion on the channel to mark the send-off, if you like, transitioning from one to another. So we'll have to invite you back so we can, bed in the new office setup as well.
Definitely.
Awesome. So, Chris, I guess this is your first time on Cloud with Chris. Maybe we should make a Cloud with Chris squared or something. I don't know for this session. But introduce yourself. Who are you, Chris?
Yeah, my name is Chris Ayers. I live in the United States, in Tampa, Florida. So we are not experiencing much cold at the moment. We're pretty warm in the 70 or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. I've been developing since second grade and dabbled with pretty much every type of technology I could get my hands on, doing things like infrastructure and system administration. I've been a network admin for a while, and cloud solution architect. And now, um, I used to lead people and lead teams, and now I'm part of the fast track team at Microsoft. So I'm part of Azure engineering, trying to make Azure the best platform out there and help our customers in any way I can.
Excellent. And we may have heard about that team once or twice on this channel before. Very, very fond memories of that team, and a great team to be part of. So congratulations
Yeah.
for joining the team and joining Microsoft as well. Exciting place to be.
Thank you. Yeah, I've only been here about 3 or 4 months, but I absolutely love it and kind of love it more every day, actually. So
Awesome. No, good to hear. And I guess, the topic for today, feature flags, is quite a DevOps related concept, really. And I know you're no stranger to DevOps either, right?
No, as I went through my career, I really dived into DevOps about probably 4 or 5 years ago, kind of going from, well, I mean, if you think about it, going through the transition a lot of us went through of building our code and maybe FTPing it up to a server or copying it to right-click deploy, publish profiles, you love them, to, hey, let's leverage something, TFS, Octopus Deploy, Jenkins. Let's get some sort of automation in place. To started leading a DevOps team and really evangelizing everything I could around DevOps and the DevOps mindset. I've met Gene Kim and a number of the people behind things like the DevOps Handbook and the Phoenix Project, and like it's the cultural mindset shift that I really fell in love with. You can't buy a tool and expect it to solve all of your problems. You really have to reconsider and reevaluate what is acceptable. Like, what's my acceptable level of quality, and how can I bake that in? And can I let go of manual everything and start trusting computers to do what they're good at?
Absolutely. And I know I laughed at the right-click publish bit earlier, but there is genuinely a time and a place for right-click publish. Those early kind of stages where maybe you're prototyping, you're not quite sure if you're going to invest. But honestly, I found so many times when I build that pipeline or that workflow or whatever it is, that acceleration is just crazy.
It's not only that. Yes, it's developer velocity. You can go back to the State of DevOps reports that were generated for a number of years, and now the Microsoft research on developer velocity. You can look at the books like Accelerate and Phoenix Project, but it doesn't just lead to faster turnaround and faster development and improve software performance. It leads to customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction. You don't have to stay up all night and all weekend worrying about that 2-day deployment and coordinating everything and having to be up all night to manage a deployment, when maybe you can right-click deploy and or like click deploy and approve and then click rollback. Like it changes things, and it makes life so much easier.
Absolutely. And funnily enough, I've got a blog post which I'm working on at the minute with GitHub Actions and Azure Static Web Apps, because that's how cloudwithchris.com is hosted, making some interesting tweaks to my workflow. So a little bit of a teaser there for something to come.
Yeah, I need to do one on Mermaid, because there's been new Mermaid support in GitHub Actions, and it was always supported in the DevOps Azure DevOps Wiki.
Right.
And I've just fallen in love with Mermaid and everywhere I can. So I'm like, I want to automate that. Like, take an armor bicep template, print out the thing, and make it Mermaid. And
I did see, I think it was on Twitter, or maybe it was LinkedIn, but somewhere on socials anyway, someone's already done that, taken with, I think it was .NET. They kind of decompiled their classes of their projects and then mapped that into Mermaid just as part of their CI/CD process. So, self-documenting code, we all love that, right? Like, that's the nirvana that we want to be.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good. So I guess feature flags is what we're going to be covering today. So floor is yours, Chris.
Great. So, we're going to be talking about feature flags, the art of the if and deployment. I already gave a little bit about myself. You can reach out. You can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn. I have a blog where I occasionally write about things. I try to be as regular and consistent as others. I sometimes fail. That's okay. I also got a GitHub out there with code, so feel free to follow along. I've got some samples out there. I really want to hit 4 points with talking about feature flags. What are they? You hear feature flags a lot, maybe feature toggles. What are they? So let's talk about that. Why do you want to use them? And this is really where I think this conversation is going to have value. You can go look up how to implement any of the services out there, from Azure App Config to Launch Darkly to Optimizely. You can go look that up. That's easy. But when do you leverage the flags? Why do you want to use the flags? Kind of separating the idea of deployment and release and why that's important. And then finally, how we can optimize those flags and operationalize them and make them work for us in our systems. So let's start with that first item. What are feature flags? If we go to the next slide. Thank you. So let's just say we have some code. We have an implementation. We call a class. We do something. So we do some stuff. We get a result. And we want to implement new functionality. We want to figure out how to make it better. Maybe the very first thing we do is we just define a variable in our code. And we use an if. These are the first kind of toggles on how we might encapsulate old code versus new code. Unfortunately, this requires a recompile. Every time we want to change it, we got to go change code. We got to do a commit. We got to check it in. But maybe if I'm working locally and I'm not doing it in a branch, I'm like trying to have code live beside each other, I could have an if there. This isn't best practice by any sense of the imagination, but it's something some people do. What we start doing today is we start having libraries that can allow us to process if a flag is on or off. And this might be coming from configuration files. This might be coming from an endpoint. This might be coming from a database. But there's a system that drives a feature management library of some kind. And we can turn on and off functionality based on that simple Boolean value. Now, this is, again, a simple case of it's always on or it's always off. But we're going to have some advanced functionality we can talk about that might show how powerful this idea is and how it can really help us take our development to the next level.
And I love the concept of feature flags. Just broadly, I'm sure we're going to get to it, but I feel it unlocks, going back to that DevOps mindset we were talking about earlier. I think one of those main characteristics, tacits, whatever you want to call it, of DevOps is this ability to be able to experiment and be data-driven and just kind of figure things out, I guess, and see, is something going to work? Is this going to work?
Oh, yeah.
Trying things. And this really unlocks that for you, I feel.
Exactly. And you're actually driving me to my next point. So why do we use them?
There we go.
And so we use them for a couple of different ways. And this can be during the development process. Maybe we want to separate out code. Maybe we don't want our old implementation and new implementation living side by side. We don't just want to add another method below it. Maybe we want to isolate it out into other code, and we can use the feature flag to toggle between them. And we can separate out different implementations of an interface. Maybe, as we use feature flags, we only want to turn it on in certain places and not in others. So we can minimize that disruption to our customers. We can be working on the next version of a thing while having it off and not shipping it out to people. This allows the capability of progressive rollouts. You can start saying, hey, give it to these canary users, give it to 10%, give it to that inner ring, then progress outwards and start, releasing that feature to more and more users. And so you can slowly roll it out. And if you screwed up somewhere, you can turn it back off. You have a kill switch. You have some capabilities now that maybe you didn't have before. I like to give the example of an e-commerce site because I've done a lot of e-commerce work.
Mm.
Let's say you're starting to implement a new marketing feature where it's like making recommendations, and you start rolling it out, but you implemented it wrong, and it's just tanking the database. Well, you could turn that feature back off as a kill switch, and now it's not running anymore, and the site can come back to normal. And then A/B testing, that what you just brought up, Chris. Does that red button or does that blue button gain the attention of our users and drive more interaction and really highlight the call to action? Does it work better with horizontal tabs or vertical tabs? Let's try it and find out and touch on that user interaction and see how it works.
And I love all of these examples, right? Because it shows the power of something so simple, like quite literally. When we really, yeah, exactly. We really boil it down. We're talking about if. That's all we're talking about. It's just the simple kind of conditional statement. If this thing, show this. If not, don't show it. And, it allows you to have that code separation, as you say. It allows you to be able to do progressive rollouts, even have that kill switch and, turn off a feature if, as you say, you've done as much testing as you can. You put your load testing in place, you put your chaos testing in place, but this tiny edge scenario that you never came across at all in all of that testing, and as you say, it tanks the database. Kill it. We need to go and look into that. And this is really, again, to the point you mentioned earlier, something really subtle, isn't it, about decoupling the concept of continuous delivery with continuous deployment.
And we are going to get to that. I think a lot of there's a subtle implication here too, that we are managing feature flags without redeploying our code, without recompiling our code, without restarting our code.
Great point.
And that's we're going to touch on why we want to leverage some of these systems people built to manage feature flags.
Excellent.
But not all flags are the same. I mean, sometimes they're short term. We're going to work on a new feature. We're going to make a short-term feature flag. We're going to try this one thing for a couple of days, a sprint, and then we're going to take it out. Now, I mean, that means it could be anywhere. Maybe it's in a startup implementation. Maybe it's in the database layer or the UI. So it can be hard to know where you might find a feature flag. It might not just be some sort of service level toggle. It literally could be anywhere in your code if it's just a small piece of functionality that you want to be able to turn on and off, or maybe hide an incomplete implementation until you're fully done with it. There's an implication of trunk-based development there. I'm a huge fan of it because but that means it makes it safer for us to work in production or to work in our main branches.
Right.
Then, you can't check that in. We got to have a long branch. We got to have the dev branch for like 5 years.
And no one wants that, right? The merge hell of having to go through all of that. No, thanks.
As a sideline, I always say, if you have a long-term dev branch and a long-term QA branch, is there a chance that there's stuff in dev that never got made into QA? Maybe something got cherry-picked or something got left behind and you just never thought it was good for QA. Well, suddenly now your dev stuff is different in QA. Could the same thing happen between your QA branch and production? Suddenly you're testing things, different set of bits than what you're running in production, different set of bits. Right. And your quality confidence should be out the window at that point. And trunk-based, build once, deploy many. That's the only way to get growing confidence every stage.
Absolutely. Couldn't say it better myself. There's an interesting additional potential challenge, though, that comes with feature flags, isn't there? Where if you've got a site where you're really hammering out all the features, you've got a great cadence, sprint after sprint, you're delivering more and more stuff, but at the same time, all of those if statements start adding up a little bit like death of 1,000 paper cuts, don't they? And start adding up as technical debt if you don't move them.
Well, that's the third point. You have to clean them up. I get to that in the best practices section toward the end, but
cool.
It's technical debt. As soon as you introduce a feature flag, you're introducing technical debt.
Gotcha.
You have a branching point and you have old code that you don't always want to run. That if that's not a flag for cleanup or a sign for cleanup, I don't know what is.
All of those cycles which are being wasted. Do I want to do this? No, just run this code. There's optimizations. So good.
So now we get to some other scenarios. Maybe there are some long-term use cases for flags, for feature flags. And it actually can evolve into, maybe it's not a feature flag anymore. Maybe it turns into a property. And I'll talk about that. Like licensing. Like originally, maybe licensing is a feature flag, potentially. Maybe it's, hey, you get a trial, so they're not signed up and they're getting pop-ups to maybe sign up or to upgrade if they're in a trial. Eventually, as you start testing out functionality, maybe the first time you implement it, it's surrounded by flags. And then you start opening it up to users. And then once it's in the code base and it's established and there are definite feature tiers, maybe those move away from a feature flag and a short-term management system into something that's just purely configuration. Or maybe it's a property. Like, hey, this user is a premium user. Something like that. So flags don't have to stay flags forever. They can evolve into something else. Advanced features. I think we've all seen this in many UIs where you can go and check the box, show me advanced, or see an extra tab, and you get exposure to additional features that you might not see in the normal UI. You can also do that right on like Azure DevOps and other services. You can enable preview features, and you're selecting to always have that feature flag on, for instance. Integrations. Maybe as you start working on like a payment processor or an email processor, you can toggle whether you want to support like PayPal or Visa or MasterCard, or maybe you want to turn off some of those, Stripe and then re-enable it. Like you have those options, and they can almost be operational flags instead of long-term feature flags. And finally, load management. Like I mentioned earlier with e-commerce sites, maybe you have a marketing recommendation engine. It's possible on Black Friday or on one of the major holidays where you have exponential traffic growth. Maybe you want to turn off expensive features and give a more streamlined experience on those days so that you have more, you can handle the increased traffic without burdening yourself with all this processing you're doing on the back end.
And again, just to really reiterate, it shows how something so small, those two letters, if, this really simple concept can be so powerful and unlock so many different scenarios here as well. Really, really interesting.
That's why it's the art of the if. Mm-hmm. And now for the other half, the art of deployment. Mm-hmm. So many people use deployment and release very interchangeably.
Yes.
And when you really start talking to people who have embraced DevOps and are trying to improve their craft, you start seeing a separation of terms, and you start seeing them being very explicit about what you're talking about. Deployment is something we do a lot, and I always view it as I'm putting bits on a server, or I'm putting bits on a service somewhere. I'm deploying code. I'm deploying things. This is where our pipelines come into play. We have pipelines. They compile our code, they put it on things. It's repeatable. It's super low risk. It's routine. When you start looking at the state of DevOps, when you start looking at developer velocity, there's a couple of key metrics, and one of them is deployments per developer per day. Mm-hmm. And so when you start looking at elite performers, they're deploying, potentially tens or hundreds of times a day to production, small little bits of things. That doesn't mean it's turning on a feature, though.
No.
It doesn't mean, hey, our new UI for Cloud with Chris, maybe some of those bits are in the background that you were slowly starting to work on, but maybe hadn't switched over some of your styling and some of your interactions, but they were being checked in.
And this is a really interesting point, isn't it? Like when you think of some of the big Microsoft conferences, as an example, like Ignite or Build or things like that, can you imagine the risk of having to say, right, we're going to start rolling out this feature now whilst we're running this conference?
They did that once. I think.
It was a while ago, wasn't it? I think
with Azure DevOps, and I'm pretty sure if I remember right, it happened with Azure DevOps, and it went down to like a single region, and so all the traffic everywhere went to one region, and then they were trying to scale it up.
Yeah, I remember there was a
Something
blog
like that.
post or similar. Yeah, yeah. But this is exactly the point, isn't it? Is if you're
Right.
delivering
And
those
just
bits.
because
Yep.
it's out there doesn't mean people are using it. You can have
Mm-hmm.
endpoints that are built, but maybe none of the UI references it. Or you
Yep.
have microservices that are deployed, but no one's using them. This is where the release comes in, when we turn on that new functionality. And these are usually business decisions. Let's say we're going to have a big conference and we want to really, release our new feature that they probably didn't deploy that morning, like you said. It's probably been being deployed for weeks. They're just flipping the bit to show it off to people. This is where we have that access to a feature, but it also can be percentage based. It can be a segment of the population. It doesn't have to be all of your user base. It can be part of your user base, which gets us into that idea of the blast radius of change. Oops, there we go. And I love this diagram. The blast radius of change is a term you get a lot in DevOps. And are you rebooting the whole system and taking it all down? Can you leverage canary and blue-green deployments to limit who gets impacted by a change? Maybe a small group, and then growing out to full deployment.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I think that term blast radius, I use it in so many different scenarios as well. Not just in the deployment side, but even things like security and permissions. If that thing gets compromised, what is then the blast radius? And I think it's a really nice analogy in this scenario, because it really is, isn't it? Is you're increasing the scope gradually with these rings of if something is wrong, the damage that is going to be done. Now, ideally, you want to catch those as close to the center as you can, to your most, not dedicated necessarily, but those users who don't mind maybe the rough edges, who are a little more on the bleeding edge. But yeah, if it gets to those
exactly
full deployment, that's where you probably have problems.
We got plenty of time, right?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's really focus on operationalizing. We've got an idea of an if. We've got, maybe we're going to pull it in from a configuration or something. It's all about control, really. And this is where I tell people all the time: is your business value, is your company, is your goal writing a feature flag library? Is your organization going to go implement an authentication standard? Is like, are you writing Identity Server 5? Are you building a logging framework? Are you building a security framework? No. It's deceptively harder than you think it is. Rely on something someone's already built. Trust me. Because when you start thinking about it, how are you managing the feature flag? Is it going to be like that first example where it's a variable hard-coded into the code, and so you have to make a check-in and toggle which method you're calling? You probably don't want to do that. You have to rebuild, redeploy, re-release. You have to go through recycling the application, something. Back in the on-prem days, did you have a machine config or a configuration file or setting on the individual servers so that some servers had the feature and other ones didn't? Are you going to do it per user? So maybe do some sort of identity lookup and see if they have a property. Or are you going to do it in a database? Is it going to be dynamically where you just flip a coin if they get access to the feature or not? How are you going to ensure that front-end requests and back-end requests that maybe both rely on the same feature flag are enabled for that same request? You don't want it turned on the front end and off on the back end for a user, or vice versa. It can be a headache. And if you have multiple flags that are maybe nested, how do you test that? What is the configuration of QA? What's the configuration of production? What's the configuration of dev?
And to come back to the point you made at the very beginning of this slide, people have solved this problem. And it almost brings me a little bit to the thoughts of like PaaS and SaaS versus IaaS. If someone's already solved that problem, why do you want to build your own feature flag system when you could?
Part of it is NIH.
Yeah.
Not invented here syndrome. NIH
That's
syndrome.
That's it. But the thing is, though, right, is how many times do we think, right, you know what, we want to go and use paths because we just want to focus on our application. We want to focus and make that app the best it can be. But we're just going to start building these feature flag things ourselves instead because we control that and that's part of our app. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it distracts you.
It's a value stream conversation I have with lots of people. Like, is your organization's thing that you're building a feature flag library?
Right.
No. Like, is that where your business logic is? No. Okay, then go buy one. That's a commodity product. Yep. Azure App Config does this phenomenally well. It integrates with Key Vault. It integrates with DevOps. It integrates with GitHub. It's phenomenal.
Yep.
Launch Darkly. They're out there. They're phenomenal. Optimizely. That's one. There's others out there. I don't know them all, but it's been solved. And they have SDKs and libraries that work across multiple languages, mobile, web, backend servers. Do that.
That's it.
But these management pieces, these management systems, they give you capabilities beyond that simple if. And these can be baked into the SDKs for the services. These can be baked into like part of the filtering engine. Maybe you only want to enable things at certain times a day. Maybe you're trying to target certain user details, or you have promotions that vary by region, or functionality you want to test by region. I mean, we're not all the same, even in the regions we live in, but maybe during lunch hours, you do certain behaviors that are different than after work or in the middle of the business day.
And there's a really interesting point in there, right? Is imagine you are running that global system. Maybe coming back to the retail example you mentioned earlier, maybe you are running a global business where you're a retailer platform and you run offers at certain times of the day or over a certain period or whatever it may be. You don't want to go ahead having to coordinate deployments to certain aspects of the fleet, depending on the region. And that just sounds like a recipe for disaster. Again, the simplicity of that if statement, having it part of the code base to just go, right, this aspect of the fleet just shows it.
If it's enabled, turn it on. And you can have that enabled logic based on that time or that region.
Yep.
It lets you do that exploratory testing. Like 10% of our users get this feature and 90% don't, or 50-50. You can trigger it like I discussed earlier. Maybe our load or our failure rates are going up and it's tied to a certain service or feature flag. So, we're getting payment processor errors. Let's automatically trigger that feature flag off that is showing, the provider that's giving us errors. Now it doesn't even show up as an option as you start reducing those errors and it starts kind of clearing its way out of the system. Same with load. Hey, we're getting a spike in traffic. Let's disable that recommendation engine. And it just happens automatically, magically.
Automagic. That's my favorite term.
I know. Yeah.
It's excellent.
But hey, feature flags are not the greatest thing in the world. They're pretty good though. They're technical debt. And just like you said, there can be ifs all over the place. As soon as you add them, it's harder to support the system. What's the level of nesting? What's the configuration? What flags are out there?
And then being able to being able to track them down and figure out where they are, and more importantly, I think, are you able to get rid of the flag yet? When is that philosophical debate, isn't it? When is the right time to remove the flag?
Well, there's actually some discussion about that. There's a blog by GitHub that talks about that. And then that actually ties into my next slide. Best practices. So do you even know where all the flags are or what their names are? Have a naming convention. Be aggressive about your naming convention and pull requests and PRs. Why'd you name it that way? Follow the convention. You can have a step that could look for that, but have a naming convention for both short and long term, and maybe have a a prefix that tells you if it's expected to be a short-term thing or if it's something that's going to stick around. We don't usually do a lot with older languages that have limitations on names of variables or constants or properties. I mean, we're not stuck with 1 or 2 letters. So have meaningful names. This applies to variable naming, function naming, class naming. Have meaningful names. Use a comment. Give it a good description. Like, be clear about what it's for. I know this is kind of redundant saying this to people who are interested in this, but be very clear about the purpose of a feature flag. Have a good central location for it. Maybe it's an enumeration or a class or a constant file. Whatever. Have a place to look for flags. Just like with anything else, if you're poking and hunting all over a code base for information, it's a bad experience and someone's going to mess something up.
It's interesting. There's part of what you were saying there triggered something in my mind, actually. There's a talk that I'm looking to get scheduled on the show. Haven't quite got around to it yet, but the title of it is Code is Red. And the description or the bio of this talk is effectively the difference between maybe someone earlier in their development career and someone who's more senior in their developer career. The more junior person thinks, I need to write this code in a really clever way. I need to use all these clever syntactical sugar and all these things. Whereas actually, by the point you get to that, more senior developer kind of role, you realize, nope.
Readability is king.
Exactly. And this is, exactly the point we mentioned earlier. Self-documenting code. What is that? Meaningful names, comments, and, can we integrate Mermaid into that as well? That would be awesome, wouldn't it? Ooh, that would be an interesting idea. Integrating Mermaid to track all of your feature flags and dependencies.
Yeah, well, this is definitely something I've come across before that idea. I mean, we read, 10, 50, 100 times more code than we write. Occasionally putting 5 or 6 lines in of code a day. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but if you know exactly where to put it, it can save you, weeks of work potentially. So you're reading it and you're running it and you're putting the pieces together in your head. So.
That's it. How often do we kind of rush and type something in where if you had that thoughtful, let me just think about the puzzle pieces and put it together, it makes it so much easier for someone to adopt. Because especially if you're brand new to a project, right? You're brand new, you're trying to pick it up and trying to make sense of it. There's nothing worse than seeing a page full of just like 2-letter variables that make no sense. And, I'm suddenly having to get my algebra textbook out just to figure out all the mappings between all of these things.
And this next point is really kind of the basic of Agile, Scrum, just communication. Using a new flag, if you're planning on changing the state of the flag, just like if business is planning on saying, hey, we're going to release this feature, which tells you they're going to turn it on or off, share that. Like it should be communicated like, hey, we've introduced this new flag. Hey, we're going to change the state of this flag. Hey, when we tested it this way, blah. It's really bad and I've had this happen. Someone's testing locally and they start doing stuff, and then maybe when it was in a configuration system or it was in like a DevOps variable or something, they would make a change and it would get deployed out or built out a certain way in dev, and that might go up in the QA with the wrong configuration. Leveraging those management systems really helps prevent all that, but having a discussion around it, I think, is extremely important. And finally, never repurpose a featured flag. Like, don't think it's gone and reuse it. There's actually a story you can look up about, I think it was like Knight Capital or something. It was a firm that did stock trading, and somebody repurposed a feature flag, and when it got enabled, the system made some trades very quickly, and they ended up owing like $400 million or something crazy like that. And they ended up bankrupting themselves, reusing a feature flag.
They can be They need to come with a health warning.
And code, the code does not by itself exist. Like, it needs data to operate on. And so as you start changing your code, you're going to need to change your models, your SQL, your JSON models, what gets returned from endpoints. And so I have a little bit of advice on that kind of integrates into how feature flags work, which is never always be additive. Never change any of the existing fields that you have. So if I have like 4 or 5 fields that are strings and I'm going to make one of them into an int property, I would add a new field or a new property or a new column into my database that maybe had it as an int. And in database, maybe I would have a trigger on the back end to keep the two synchronized. I can now deploy out database changes or change backend APIs because they're returning a couple of extra fields or different fields, but they're not changing any of the fields that clients are expecting. And so I can deploy out backend code or deploy out databases earlier in the deployment process. And I don't have to have this big coordination the day of the big release. I can start trickling out features earlier. Hey, we're going to support such and such. We're going to need these extra fields in the models. Well, let's go ahead and build those and deploy them out additively. Hey, we've got to do this thing. Let's go ahead and change the database, get the database deployment out there. The old code can access it and still operate. The new code, if it gets those fields, can operate just fine. So they can coexist, old version, new version. So it's easier to deploy forward and roll back and toggle using the old thing and the new thing than it is, okay, deploy the database, deploy all this, deploy the code. Roll back the database because we changed the column. Roll back the code, restore the backups. It's a nightmare. So always try to be additive. And then if you do have to remove a field or change a field, obsolete it, add a new field, have a trigger, use everybody having the new field, have that deployed out, use that for like 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever. And at the point you're happy that everything's been upgraded and the system's running fine and those deprecated properties are no longer used, do another database deployment or API deployment and remove the models. Mm-hmm. It can save a headache.
Yeah, it's that idea, isn't it? Great power, great responsibility. Some franchise wise once said that. But it was interesting as you were talking earlier about that concept of having to go through the motions of a big production release and starting to think about the orchestration and all of those things. I think that's probably a good trigger, isn't it? Or a good indicator that actually maybe feature flags is something for us, because if you're getting that nervous feeling that you've got a deployment or a release coming up and you're thinking, okay, I'm probably not going to have a weekend now because if this goes wrong, I've got to start rolling back and I've got to start doing this, and this. Maybe, well, there's probably more to it than that, but maybe feature flags could help solve part of that problem at least.
Yeah, and it's really, yes, there's a discipline involved. All new code changes, all new features, you have to wrap them in feature flags. You have to be intentional about how you're introducing changes. It's not just, I'm going to implement this, and maybe not everything needs a feature flag. There are some changes that don't, but it's also, you start working on something and you realize, this is going to be bigger and need a change. Maybe I need to fork this off, then surround it with ifs and feature flags, and then maybe I can recommit it back in, and I'm not going to be able to merge this thing into my main branch right away. I'm going to have to protect it until all the other changes are in place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think maybe something just to really bring it out as we start wrapping up here as well is, while feature flags, we've mentioned a few times and made a bit of a joke around it, that they're just so simple. They're an if statement at the end of the day. They're really simple as a concept. They take a lot of maturity to get right. If you haven't got some of those DevOps principles in place already around checking the quality of your work as you go and having your CI/CD pipelines in place and all these things, feature flags are going to be really challenging to go and manage unless you've got some of those foundational pieces in place.
Yeah. I think CI/CD is a vital part of this, but once you start down this path, it really can provide amazing results. Zero downtime deployments are part of this. Continuous rollout of features, experimenting in production. There's so many benefits to this.
Absolutely. Excellent.
That's really all I had today. Like I said, there's a number of amazing platforms and services out there that help implement and manage these feature flags. Feature flags cross over into just application configuration. They cross over into secret management a little bit. I like Azure App Config, Azure engineering, but it integrates so well, Azure App Config, with ASP.NET and its configuration system that's been just phenomenal since .NET Core. I know in Framework, it was always annoying having to manage configuration. We had web configs, we had, if we did dependency injection, we had to kind of roll our own or find something. We get all of that in .NET Core. We get all of that in .NET 6 and on. So having that kind of integrate in really well, and they have some feature management libraries that plug in, so you can do Razor views and backend code where it recognizes when it's turned on and off, and you can dynamically reload them. Launch Darkly, you can inject that right into the same configuration system, and you can get a Launch Darkly client out, and you can quickly and easily just add into your backend code, hey, is this feature on or off? You can set a flag or a Boolean and then put that into a Razor page pretty easily. Same with Optimizely, and they have libraries and SDKs for not only .NET, usually Java, Python, Node, JavaScript, mobile. There's usually a big feature set and supported platform. So go look at those. Go do that. Don't write your own.
But it's interesting because you got me thinking here. My site, I mentioned I did quite a big UI overhaul on it, and there's still going to be lots more to come, experimentation, etc. But something that I'm thinking about here is it's all based on Hugo. So I've made the theme myself. Static site generator renders all of the markdown, etc., into the resulting site that gets published into static web apps. And there are frameworks from a JavaScript perspective for the likes of app config. So I'm sensing this has been a bad talk in the sense that it's given me something on my list to go, I need to try something else out. I need to write a blog post on this. This could be interesting, which means it's been a brilliant talk, of course, but it's now one of those things that could be something.
And just because it's a static website generator or you're running in Azure Static Apps does not mean, and this is a common misconception, doesn't mean your site is static. It's not pure HTML. It means you have HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, and those don't change. You can still have interactive websites that are fully dynamic and they can call out and do stuff. It's just that CDN of
distribution,
static files.
Jamstack, JavaScript, API, markup. There we go. Excellent. Well, Chris, this has been a super talk. Thank you so much for joining. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And like we said earlier, you've got that office move coming up from one part of the house to another. So we'll have to get you back when you've relocated and bring you on for another topic as well.
I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So there we go, folks. We've been talking all about feature flags. We've been talking about why you might want to consider using them. We've been talking about the trade-offs that you need to consider and some of those foundational pieces that you really need to have in place to be successful with feature flags as well. So you know the deal, folks. If you have liked the episode, please hit the like button. Please subscribe on whatever channel you are on. And of course, do share about that to others as well, because we're back. We've got guests back on the channel, and we're going to keep that momentum going, building upon things, and who knows where we'll end up. So next Tuesday, so that'll be the 22nd, I believe, we will be running Tool Up Tuesday once again. So tune in on the channel, 7:30 in the evening, GMT. And otherwise, folks, stay safe, stay healthy. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Bye for now.